The snow fell like whispered prayers that Christmas Eve, each flake carrying the weight of 1,000 wishes into the darkness. But for Marcus Chen, the CEO of Tech Vision Industries, Christmas had lost its magic 3 years ago when cancer stole his wife Sarah, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter Emma alone. Now, as he drove through the empty streets of downtown Seattle at 11:47 p.m., returning from another soul-crushing board meeting that had stretched deep into the holy night, he felt nothing but the familiar ache of loneliness that had become his constant companion. The city looked different on Christmas Eve, softer somehow, as if the harsh edges of corporate life had been dusted with something sacred. Streetlights cast golden halos through the falling snow, and even the towering glass buildings seemed to bow their heads in reverence to the night. Marcus loosened his tie, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. Emma was spending Christmas with Sarah's parents in Portland, and he'd convinced himself that working was better than sitting alone in their too quiet house, surrounded by memories that still cut like broken glass. That's when he saw her. At first, it was just a small, dark shape huddled against the dumpster behind Romano's Italian restaurant, the kind of place where he and Sarah used to steal away for quiet dinners when Emma was a baby. Marcus almost drove past, his mind already focused on the empty house waiting for him, but something made him stop. Something about the way the shape seemed so perfectly still, so heartbreakingly small against the massive steel container. He pulled over, his Mercedes purring to a stop under the flickering streetlight. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on his windshield like a curtain being drawn across the world. Through the swirling white, he could see it clearly: a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, curled up in a cardboard box that had once held restaurant supplies. She was wearing a thin pink dress that had seen better days, and her tiny feet were bare except for mismatched socks with holes in the toes. Marcus's heart stopped. For a moment that stretched into eternity, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The CEO who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions was paralyzed by the sight of this child sleeping in the snow on Christmas Eve, her small chest rising and falling with each precious breath. He was out of the car before his mind caught up with his body, his expensive Italian shoes crunching through the snow as he approached the makeshift shelter. The cold bit at his face, but it was nothing compared to the ice that gripped his heart as he knelt beside the box. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Are you okay?" The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open to reveal the deepest brown eyes Marcus had ever seen, her eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone so young. She looked up at him without fear, which somehow made everything worse. "I'm waiting for my mommy," she said simply, her voice small but steady. "She said she'd come back after she found us a better place to live." Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. "How long have you been waiting, honey?" The girl considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Since the big hand was on the 12 and the little hand was on the 8, she said, pointing to the church clock visible across the street. It now read nearly midnight. 4 hours. This child had been sleeping in a cardboard box in the snow for 4 hours on Christmas Eve. "I'm Marcus," he said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "What's your name?" "Isabella," she replied, sitting up in her box. "But Mommy calls me Bella." "Are you an angel?" Mommy said angels come when little girls need help. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. An angel? He was anything but a workaholic who'd been running from his own pain for 3 years, who'd let his company become more important than his own daughter's bedtime stories. "No, sweetheart, I'm just a man," he said gently. "But I'd like to help you if that's okay." Without waiting for an answer, Marcus shrugged out of his wool coat the one Sarah had bought him for their last Christmas together and wrapped it around Isabella's tiny shoulders. She disappeared inside it like a bird in a nest. "We need to get you somewhere warm," he said, scooping her up, box and all. She weighed almost nothing, and the thought made his chest tight with rage at the world that could let this happen. As he carried her to his car, Isabella looked up at the falling snow with wonder. "It's like God is shaking sugar from the sky," she whispered. Marcus had to stop walking for a moment, overcome by the simple beauty of her words. When was the last time he'd seen anything with such pure eyes? When was the last time he'd seen magic in the world instead of just problems to be solved and profits to be made? He settled Isabella in the passenger seat, cranking up the heat and buckling her seatbelt with the careful attention he'd once given to Emma when she was smaller. The little girl's eyes were growing heavy again, exhaustion taking its toll. "Where do you live, Bella?" Marcus asked gently. "In the blue car," she mumbled, her head lolling against the leather seat. "But it got took away yesterday," Mommy cried. The pieces were falling into place, and each one broke Marcus's heart a little more. A mother and daughter living in their car until it was repossessed, ending up on the streets just in time for Christmas. It was the kind of story he read about in reports, the kind of statistics that scrolled across his phone screen during charity board meetings. But this wasn't a statistic. This was Isabella, with her mismatched socks and her belief in angels and her unshakable faith that her mummy would come back. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving to the police station or calling social services, he found himself heading toward the one place that still felt like sanctuary: a Seattle Children's Hospital, where Sarah had volunteered before she got sick, where they had a family shelter program for emergencies just like this. As they drove through the sleeping city, Isabella's small hand found his on the gear shift. Her fingers were like ice, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Are you sad?" she asked, studying his face with those impossibly wise eyes. Marcus realized he was crying at tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 3 years, flowing freely down his cheeks. "A little," he admitted. "Mummy says it's okay to be sad sometimes," Isabella said solemnly. "She says sad is just love with nowhere to go." The simple truth of it nearly undid him. Sad is just love with nowhere to go. In 6 words, this homeless child had explained what 3 years of therapy and countless sleepless nights couldn't. They pulled up to the hospital just as Christmas Day was officially born. The emergency family shelter was staffed 24/7, and within minutes, Isabella was wrapped in warm blankets, being examined by kind nurses while social workers made calls to locate her mother. Marcus stayed, telling himself it was just until they found her family, but knowing it was something deeper. Something about this little girl had cracked open the wall he'd built around his heart, and he couldn't just walk away. At 3 a.m., they found Isabella's mother, Maria, at Seattle General Hospital. She'd collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition while searching for work, and had been unconscious since early evening. When she woke to find her daughter safe and a stranger sitting beside her bed, she broke down completely. "I failed her," Maria sobbed, her accent thick with emotion and exhaustion. "I promised her mommy would take care of everything, and I failed." Marcus looked at this woman, probably no older than 30, worn thin by circumstance but still fighting, and saw something he recognized: the fierce love of a parent pushed beyond their limits, the desperate strength that comes from having someone depending on you completely. "You didn't fail," he said quietly. "You survived. Both of you survived." Over the next few hours, the whole story came out. Maria had been a nurse in El Salvador before bringing Isabella to America for a better life. She'd been working 3 jobs to make ends meet when she got sick and couldn't work. The car was all they had left, and when it was repossessed, they had nowhere else to go. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, Marcus found himself in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee with a woman whose strength made his own struggles feel small. Isabella was sleeping peacefully in the family shelter room, finally warm and safe. "Why did you stop?" Maria asked suddenly. "Most people, they drive past. They don't want to see." Marcus thought about that night 3 years ago when he'd gotten the call about Sarah's cancer returning, how he'd driven these same streets in a daze, feeling like his world was ending. How many people had driven past his pain without stopping? "Because someone needed to," he said simply. The truth that left Marcus stunned wasn't what he'd expected to find in that alley. He'd thought he might discover some heartbreaking story about the system failing, about bureaucratic red tape or social services stretched too thin. Instead, he discovered something far more profound. The truth was that he'd been the one who was lost. For 3 years, he'd been sleepwalking through his life, going through the motions of being a father and a CEO while his heart remained locked away in grief. It took finding Isabella in that cardboard box to realize that healing doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from opening your heart wide enough to hold both sorrow and joy, loss and love. That morning, Marcus made another decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Tech Vision Industries announced a new initiative, a comprehensive program to provide temporary housing, job training, and support services for families experiencing homelessness. The Marcus and Sarah Chen Foundation would ensure that no child would spend another night sleeping in the snow. But more than that, Marcus found his way back to the man Sarah had fallen in love with, the father Emma needed, the human being he'd forgotten how to be. He started reading bedtime stories again, taking Emma to the park, seeing magic in snow falling like sugar from heaven. Isabella and Maria became part of their extended family. Maria's nursing credentials were validated, and she found work at Seattle Children's Hospital. Isabella and Emma became inseparable friends, and their laughter filled the corners of Marcus's heart that had been empty for too long. On Christmas Eve the following year, Marcus stood in that same alley behind Romano's restaurant, but this time he wasn't alone. Emma and Isabella were with him, placing a small memorial plaque on the wall where the dumpster had been. It read simply, "Sometimes angels come in cardboard boxes. Sometimes they come in expensive cars. Always, they come with love." As snow began to fall again, soft and gentle like whispered prayers, Marcus realized that the little girl he'd found sleeping on trash that Christmas Eve hadn't been the one who needed saving. She had been the angel all along, sent to remind him that love isn't lost when someone dies, it just needs new places to go. The greatest gift isn't always wrapped in pretty paper. Sometimes it's wrapped in the courage to stop when others drive past, to see need where others see inconvenience, to let your heart break open wide enough to hold the whole world's pain and still have room for hope. That Christmas Eve encounter had stunned Marcus with its simple truth: we save others not because we are strong, but because in our willingness to be vulnerable, to care, to stop and help, we discover that we save ourselves.